Havoc is the new card coming to Marvel Snap, and I might be the only person that's even a little excited for it. I'll try to justify my feelings today by looking at the pros, the cons, the good, the bad, mechanics, interaction, and a potential deck list, and then ultimately give final judgment and a recommendation on whether or not you should get Havoc in this installment of...
Is it worth it?
Hello, nerds. So, first things first. Havoc is a 2 energy 0 power card that reads, after each turn, you lose 1 max energy and this gains 4 power. So my general overview of the card is, all I'll say before we get into mechanics and the pros and the cons of the card is that scaling cards always prove to be decent in Marvel Snap. Yes, this is probably one of the worst ones, but for the energy to power ratio that you get, name me a card, except for Blob, that gets more power to the energy you put in. You can't. 1 energy is 4 power. If you say Hood, you're wrong because you get a -3, so technically Hood is a 3 power for 1 energy. Medusa's a 5 power, but that's 2 energy. You get my point. Almost every card in the game, you get less power for the energy that Havoc technically gives you. But let's head over into the mechanics before we dig any further into whether or not Havoc is bad or good. Mechanics. So basically the main thing here is the turn Havoc is played, that's how much max energy you have for the rest of the game. You play him on turn 3, 3 energy on turns 4, 5, and 6. That's it. The second mechanic thing that might be a little weird is his power will trigger at the end of turn. All the plays play out, the turn ends, boom, he gets his power. Aside from that, the only thing I could come up with of how Havoc is actually going to function is that Havoc will get the energy on the last turn of the game. Yes, after turn 6, technically the game ends, but the turn still ended too. Some things are a little wonky like that, like Snow Guard and stuff says the end of turn or game, and the locations switch back, so I wanted to clarify there. If you could think of anything other than these 3 things, let me know in the comment section below, because I honestly, with all these videos, I try to rack through some of the confusing wording or maybe some possible instances that might be a little weird with the cards, but I couldn't think of many with Havoc. There are instances with like card interactions, like with Viper when you send it over to the opponent. By the way, don't do that. It's a silly idea. No. Like interactions like that though, yes, they will happen, but as far as the card actually functioning, I couldn't think of anything else, so let me know. Alright, what are the good parts about Havoc? Because if you're listening to people on Twitter or on Discord, there's not much good things about Havoc. But like I mentioned earlier, my first point is that he's a scaling card. Now think about all the cards that just get big naturally throughout a game. And by scaling, just to clarify, I mean stuff like Collector, Sunspot, Nebula, Angela, Bishop, cards that grow throughout the course of the game, depending on you meeting their effects or just naturally. All of these cards always end up being solid. As a matter of fact, almost every scaling card in the game, aside from Nebula, has been changed or nerfed at least once. That's because a card that gets bigger just by default, or of you doing something, or in Havoc's case, not having to do anything at all, they always end up being good. Alright, second good thing about Havoc is that he's a Series 4. Now, funnily enough, I do include Series 4 cards as a benefit or a pro or a good point to a card, because we don't get that many anymore. And a card like Havoc, which is very, could be good, it's probably bad, according to most people, the fact that you only have to spend 3k tokens on them, it's definitely an upside of the card. Another good point of Havoc is the memes. Like I mentioned with Viper earlier, people were like, oh, when Martyr came out, they were like, why don't you just eat Martyr with a Venom? Or why don't you just send over Martyr to the opponent with a Viper? You basically get the same thing with Havoc here. I've heard numerous times about people saying this is the most toxic card potentially that's ever existed, because on turn 4 you're gonna send over a Havoc with a Viper and then they're gonna have 4 max energy. That doesn't guarantee anything other than the opponent can't play anything bigger than a 4-drop. Guess what? There's lots of decks that are not gonna care about that. On top of the fact that you have to actually do the combo. But yeah, that stuff's silly, but that's a good part of the card, because there's going to be lots of funny clips on YouTube, shorts, TikTok, of people just doing absolutely ridiculous stuff with Havoc. Last good point of Havoc, other than the fact that it's a scaling card and you get the most power for the energy input that any other card in the game has, is that he's honestly, I think, much better than perceived. No one is going to respect this card until they start losing to it. And in a game where perception is very important, that's a good thing. It's a good thing. But what about the bad? Everyone's shitting on the card. So why are they pooping on it so much? Well, because the drawback is probably the most insane drawback we've seen in the game, aside from maybe Martyr. But Martyr, loses to the game, but actually, no, that's the worst drawback. Losing the game is the worst possible drawback. But yeah, this is probably number 2 on the worst drawback in Marvel Snap. The second bad point about Havoc is it's super narrow. Most decks can't utilize Havoc well. I think the only decks that are going to be able to use Havoc well are basically decks that can operate with 3 or 4 energy without having any negative downsides. For instance, Bounce, I think, is the best place for Havoc. I don't mean the current bounce lists like with Loki and stuff now, although that would work because you have Quinjet and Beast. Makes your stuff really cheap. But I mean like the old school bounce. That was just like Bishop, Angela, Kitty, Bast, that stuff. Those decks, you can play out Havoc on turn 4 and he's going to be, what is that? At the end of 4 is 4, at the end of 5 is another 4, at the end of 6. That's it. If you play Havoc on turn 4, he's a 12 power card. Bruh. And you still have 4 max energy for the rest of the game. Those bounce decks can really use that. But the downside of Havoc is I can't think of any other decks aside from Loki, Bounce, maybe some weird Zoo decks that can actually use this card. So it's a downside. Speaking of old school Bounce, here's the deck list that I would try Havoc out. Which I'm going to because I'm picking this card up. There's something inside of me that says I have to make this card good. But anyways, this is the deck list that I think Havoc is going to be really good in. As you can see, nothing here costs more than 3. And this deck is basically just all the scaling cards in the game. We've got Angela, Bishop, Werewolf, Havoc, Kitty. 5 cards that just get bigger from you just doing what you want to do anyway. Super good. And on top of that, this deck, once you hit I think you could play Havoc on turn 3 in this deck and you would still be all right. As long as you have just nothing but 1-drops in your hand. But realistically, you're probably playing Havoc on turn 4, and then just using nothing but 1-drops, playing Kitty onto Angela and your Elsa lanes, getting a lot of power that way, while your Havoc just gets absolutely beefy in another lane. But yeah, I mean, picture this. A Bast into a hand with Kitty, Havoc, Angela, Bishop. Let's just say that's all you have in your hand. All you play throughout the entire game, right? Kitty on 1, Kitty on Angela on 2. On 3, you play your Bishop, and then on 4, you can go Havoc into whatever 1-drop it is you have. By the way, your Havoc is going to be a 2-3 because of Bast, and then at the end of the turn be a 2-7. And then boom, you have 4 max energy for the rest of the game, and you have Angela, Bishop, and Havoc on the field. Oh my goodness, the opponent's gonna be really hard pressed to beat you because you have Kitty plus your other 1-drops. You can keep playing into the Angela lane, also making your Bishop bigger, and then Havoc is in another lane just getting beefy by himself. Yeah, super good. And then, if you Beast on turn 5 or something, some of your 1-drops, now you can just get even bigger. Havoc is going to win a lane, Bishop is going to win a lane, and then in another lane, your Kitty and Angela and all the rest of your 1-drops can win a lane. I think that this sort of bounce deck will easily be able to put up like 20 points in individual lanes simply because of the Angela Bishop Havoc combo. But yeah, there's really not that much of a downside in this sort of list. I think playing Havoc on turn 4 sure is going to be a little restrictive, but even on turn 5, even Havoc on turn 5 still makes him, without Bast, a 2-8, solid. But with Bast, Havoc is going to be a 2-11 on turn 5 with a Bast. That's amazing. And I am really shocked that people have not considered this yet. Everyone is just taking a big giant shit on Havoc. And I'm like, I don't understand. You are limiting yourself to 4 max energy on turn 5. And that's not really a downside here. And he's going to be probably an 8 to 11 power card. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong. I dare you. Alright, finally we're up to the Spotlight Cache recommendations on whether or not I think you should get a Havoc. Now this is weird, I've been talking up Havoc, and specifically in Bounce, but as far as the Spotlight Caches and whether or not you should get them, I would say, so for Spotlight Caches specifically, if you don't have Nico or Legion, absolutely go for Havoc. Simply because Nico and Legion are great cards. Legion also, it's a 7 power card, not an 8 power card, sorry. I have an old picture of Legion here. But my point is, if you don't have any of one of these 3 cards, go for the Spotlight Caches because these cards are worth it. Now, if you have Nico and Legion and you're iffy about Havoc, absolutely not. No, don't, because Havoc is going to be good in like 2 decks maximum. So yeah, it's not worth it there. And then as far as collector's tokens go, only if you're someone who makes YouTube videos or you're collector token rich. Like if I had 10k tokens, I would spend it on Havoc. Yeah. All right, that's it. That's my Havoc review. Just to summarize real quick, I think he's much better than people are giving him credit for. And I think he's going to make Loki and Bounce decks kind of reevaluate how they're built, because the power to energy ratio for Havoc is really big, and especially with Bast and Bishop and Angela and Kitty Pryde, I think he's going to be solid in like 1 or 2 decks. But maybe I'm crazy. I could totally accept me being wrong here, but I'm going to end up buying them, and look out for my video on Havoc and me winning on the ladder, because I'm going to do it. Yeah, that's the video. Thank you so much for watching. Later on, nerds.